I made a video about WoW Classic on my channel before I started doing the podcast. And time for fresh. I think it could be where I I remarked at how interesting it was that WoW Classic was even coming back. Um, a game like World of Warcraft that has to grow or die and had done so for 15 years, getting to a place where there is enough of an outcry to actually splinter the player base to a version of the game that was before so many refinements, optimizations, improvements, all the things that the game's done over the years. And I thought that it would potentially, I wondered if it might cause a ripple in the industry, of publishers realizing that maybe some gamers wanted a less streamlined, a less match made, a less transactional experience with video games. And something, because one of the things that WoW Classic did really well is it inconvenienced you and it made you talk to people to overcome inconveniences. And I'm really talking about the process of leveling and getting to know your community. When I talk about that, the top end of WoW Classic, which is what gets most of the press these days, the high end raiders, the raid buff loggers, that's a whole other world. And I knew at the end of phase 1, when I stopped playing, that was not something that I really needed to experience. A version of World of Warcraft, because World of Warcraft was a game that was made to have mysteries. And it was possible for it to preserve its mysteries in 2004 because there was no social media, because YouTube didn't exist, because Twitch didn't exist. And the way that you shared information was by talking to your friends, or if you were really enterprising, going to the elitist jerks forum. Best in slot, Chad, leather, human, male, warrior. Yeah, I remember back in vanilla being one of those warriors who always resisted wearing non-plate pieces, even though people were telling me it was better DPS. And getting made fun of. I got made fun of both for wanting to be a DPS warrior in vanilla and for being a DPS warrior who wore non-plate. But I did both. Totally different era. People didn't even realize that warriors were crazy DPS monsters. And it really shows how, and that's part of that. That's why I pulled out of that experience after a few months, because I felt like I'd gotten what was good out of it by leveling up and doing the first chunk of raid experiences. And I kind of thought at that time that I was going to be done with the World of Warcraft IP. Like, I'd had my nostalgia trip. I'd had my impressions of the game validated. It was as good as I remembered. It was as big feeling as I remembered. But I also made some deliberate choices to like not play with GPS, to not play with the powerful add-ons that people have developed to play the game for you in many ways. I kind of kept my blinders on. And I think that that's an increasingly uncommon way to play World of Warcraft. And I believe that the way that the retail game has progressed over the last 17 years, 16, 17 years now, is really reflective of the changing landscape of gamers. And that's a topic that I want to tunnel into in the coming weeks, like I mentioned. Lower down on my list, and actually a game I'm still playing today, is World of Warcraft Shadowlands, which is the newest expansion for the retail branch of the game. And honestly, it held no interest to me until the day I learned about covenants. What I knew about retail was exactly what Lex just said in the chat: accessibility. My understanding of the game is that it had sacrificed meaningful human and role-playing interactions on the altar of accessibility and continual sensation of progress. The idea that the dopamine hit was the most important thing that you could do, and that people weren't a tool for unlocking that. They were a barrier. And I still think to a large extent the game is designed that way. But game designs for games like this change slowly over time. And one of the thoughts that I had is if WoW retail was to learn anything from Classic, we would see things getting dropped in slowly over time, not all at once. And I thought I saw that when I heard about covenants. So what are covenants? Covenants are a big system in Shadowlands where player power is tied in, story is tied in, cosmetics are tied in, actual content is tied in. All these things are gated behind covenants, and there are 4 you can choose from. But you can't pick and choose to say, I want this from Covenant 1, I want this from Covenant 2. You can't have everything, which is a path that I understood that World of Warcraft had gone down for a number of years. I was astonished when I got back in and leveled a new character. I came back to a warrior, which is what I've always played in WoW. And I found a class that had been designed around using every single global cooldown, which to me felt ridiculous. I felt like I was playing a rogue. And I was astonished at how well developed the matchmaking systems were and how little I needed to actually find a gaming community to actually enjoy group content in the game. It felt one step removed from what Guild Wars 2 does by having multiplayer content where you don't actually group at all. You just show up at a boss and other people are there. Swarlo says, I think most specs use every GCD these days. Yeah, I think that my impression from what I've seen and what you just said too, it agrees with that. That seems to be a design goal now, to make sure every single way to play World of Warcraft has a button you can press every single time you can press a button, which I kind of get because it raises the skill ceiling, which is meaningful to people who've been playing the game for a long time and take it seriously, which a lot of people do. And if you can do that in a way where if you just do the most important skills, but not every single skill, like the difference between someone who uses every global cooldown on a warrior, like filling in extra slams and stuff, versus someone who just does their mortal strikes and their overpowers. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. That's way too detailed of a conversation, and one I'm not competent enough to have yet. But yeah, it felt like a game that desperately wanted me to play it. Whereas WoW Classic felt like a game, like a world that didn't need me. It didn't need me. WoW Classic plays hard to get. But WoW Retail is desperate to have me. At least that's what the early experience felt like to me. I don't think that changed for me in Shadowlands until I got to max level and chose my covenant. Shout out to Repairman, continuing his subscription. What's up, brother? The covenants are a hugely important system, and it's gates power, cosmetics, story progression, and accessibility, and a whole bunch of things that you want. And rather than saying you can have it all, you can change specs whenever you want to, you can swap out skills whenever you want to, you can play this content and that content and lock out here and do this there, and you can even play across servers. You can change your race if you want. You can change to the other faction if you want. All these ways that the game has opened up access to all these things that used to be permanent choices, that used to be permanent role-playing choices. And it's worth taking a moment to say that permanent choices in a role-playing game are exceedingly important to identifying with your character. If you make a choice that you can undo anytime you want, then it's not a meaningful choice. For example, I primarily play Arms Warrior in Shadowlands, but it's fucking meaningless because I can change to Protection or Fury anytime I want. And the only sacrifice I make is being a little less familiar with the rotation and having gear that's slightly less well optimized. And that's an easy fix. So that doesn't matter. The fact that I play a human doesn't matter because I can change it anytime I want. The fact that I'm playing Alliance doesn't matter because I can change it whenever I want. The fact that I'm playing on a specific server doesn't matter. You get what I'm saying, right? But Covenants is different. Covenants, you can't change whenever you want. If I want to use the very strong execute ability from the Venthyr Covenant for warriors next week, it would be very hard for me to get that Covenant state ready for me to actually play at a competent level, to do all the progression. And it's painful to change. It's not practical to change your Covenant. You can only do it once a week, and there are additional gates even beyond that. So what Shadowlands is doing is it's reintroducing identity back into the World of Warcraft formula. And I think it's kind of working because Covenants are actually pretty damn cool. A buddy of mine leveled up a Death Knight to play with me. And he chose the Venthyr Covenant because he's a sadist, and he identifies with that. But then he decided to reroll because he wanted something that was a little more competent in PvP. He chose a Paladin because everyone gets erased by ret Paladins, and it's an easy thing to look towards. I'm sure he had other reasons too. But he decided that he didn't want to play the Venthyr Covenant. And you know what he told me? He said he didn't like spending time in the zone for the Venthyr called Revendreth, which is dreary and needlessly complicated and hard to get around. It's punishment. It's a sadistic zone. It's themed along the same lines of the actual faction, which is brilliant. It should be that way. He said, no, I want to play the faction you're playing, Greg, because I was playing a faction called the Kyrian, which are kind of like the angels of Shadowlands, the angels of the afterlife. They're if you've ever died in World of Warcraft, you know that you spawn at a spirit healer, a kind of angel, and those are Kyrians essentially. I think that was retconned in with the Shadowlands expansion, and it's a beautiful zone of rolling fields and cliffs and like lazy energy streams, like rivers in the sky. And it's an easy place to be. Of course, there is also some unique power ramifications for Paladin with choosing Kyrian that are positive. So he could have chosen Kyrian or a different one, but he went with that one because it felt better. Like he made a choice that wasn't based only on power. And there are a lot of people in the World of Warcraft community who are annoyed that you have to choose between aesthetics and power. You can't have a perfect version of both. And I love that because it means the choice I make is something I can identify with, because that's the way reality actually works. You don't get to have the best of everything. You get to choose your sacrifice and make the best of what you've chosen and make that part of your identity, shape your identity. I love that. It feels great. It suggests to me that Blizzard was learning lessons from the reintroduction of Classic, at least as far back as it takes to build an entire expansion and release it at the end of 2020. And that's part of why I'm enjoying it. Because not only am I actually enjoying the moment-to-moment gameplay, and do I actually think that they pulled off a great expansion release, but I think that there's probably more to come. And I'm really excited to see what that is. And I'm really trying to learn the story of how the game got to be where it was in Battle for Azeroth, which by all accounts was a horrendous RPG experience where in order to give people enough dopamine hits of power progression. They introduced endless loot that never ended. And it was an eldritch hell that everyone despised, which thankfully seems to be they've retired a lot of the endless gearing systems from that. But anyway, I'll be talking more about World of Warcraft in the future, I'm sure. I'm not going to belabor it any more than I already have. Let's talk about other experiences that I had in 2020. After I stopped playing WoW Classic at the end of 2019, I played Monster Hunter World for a little while. Actually, I should say I played like 120 hours. I actually fucking love that game. Monster Hunter World has some of the most fun 3D combat in a game, third-person combat that I've ever played. It's slow, it's clunky, but it rewards skill, and it rewards anticipation, and it rewards understanding. I will say that by the time you get to the end game of Monster Hunter and you realize that the whole thing is just a boss rush, all the little flavor around it, where there's the story and there's the having a character, starts to drop away. And when you're connecting with people in order to get loot done. And it just lost me. I actually bought the expansion for it at the start of the year. And I put an hour in and then never came back to it. Just felt like I didn't need another game that was based on ticking achievement boxes and endlessly progressing gear. It isn't what motivates me. Okay. What else did we play? Planetside 2. Boom. Goddamn. Planetside had a fucking fantastic year. It's a game that still has a ton of problems. A ton. But it's still unique. Because it turns out building an MMO PvP shooter sandbox is actually insanely difficult and risky. And thank God for John Smedley. Otherwise, we never would have had one. But it's kept plucky over the years. Something happened. There, we can speculate on what. Something happened, and all of a sudden, Planetside got its studio talent reorganized into its own masthead. And they expanded their development staff like 1,000-fold, like from like 5 people to like 35 people, and they put out a bunch of content. Some of it was pretty high quality, some of it was pretty low quality, but they're trying stuff. They were recognizing the fact that Planetside is got some MMO bones that need to be respected too, which I think is not very popular with a bunch of the Planetside faithful who've stuck with the game through thick and thin, but I think has potential to create some hooks for those who might otherwise bounce off of what, at the end of the day, can be just a PvP shooter experience that people could get a better version of by playing a game like Counter-Strike or Valorant or Call of Duty. Lex says, especially if you have no ideas or a miscast working on the game. I'm not sure what you mean, Lex. I think that the last few months of Planetside have been a little rockier. I don't think that the missions and campaigns hit with the same kind of fireworks as the start of the year escalation update, where we got outfit wars and bastions. Also, people got used to the idea of the game getting regular updates very fast. So at the start of the year, we were all astonished that the game was getting any content at all. And like a starving person, anything tastes amazing. But then once you get used to not being starving anymore, you get a little more picky, I think. The studio was sold by Daybreak to a new company whose name escapes me. Some Scandinavian publisher who I don't know anything about. And we'll just have to see what effect that has on the game. There have been initial optimistic sharings about it, but I think that you can't, I'm not sure how much you should trust. developers sharing those kinds of insights publicly, because it's to their advantage to do so, right? Not that they're mistrustful. It's just people would be inclined to be positive because that's the situation they need to be positive to work. And yeah, so for 2021, actually, we did a reaction stream to the reveal that Rel and Andy Seitz did of what they're going to be working on this year. And my biggest takeaway from that reveal is that, like, all the stuff that they have coming out this year is like not even close to ready. I think we have to look forward to a reimplementation of Outfit Wars that is more accessible to more people and probably more casual, which is, I think, a good direction to take it. And everything else, we're just going to have to wait and see, as it always is with Planetside. But as it's always a game that I will come back to and enjoy, just hanging out, talking shit with friends, and headshotting people. Something about that is always renewable no matter what else is happening. So I continue to have a warm place in my heart for the game, and I'm really proud of all the expansions that it made in 2020. And despite the fact that not everything really landed and there are some problems outstanding, I'm optimistic that about next year. And I've talked about it quite a bit in podcasts, so feel free to revisit any of those for comments in depth. Other games, Deep Rock Galactic. Deep Rock Galactic was a joy. I think Deep Rock Galactic is a case study on how to put heart into a game. It's a game that can be played single player or with up to 3 friends, and you play as a dwarf on a mining rig in space whose job it is to mine shit for the company. And the space rig has all kinds of flavor, and there are fun explosive barrel games, and there's a bar that you order drinks at, and you you can dance. There's a jukebox you can order up music and dance with your friends with. You emote rock and stone at each other, and you customize your armor and your pickaxe, and there are different guns. I put about 70 or 80 hours into it, and I loved every single minute of it. And I just felt like I'd experienced the whole game. It's a game that I would love a good excuse to come back to, and hope I'm watching out for that. The company making Deep Rock is the studio is fairly small, so I don't know what their appetite is for large changes and additions to the game. It seems like they're satisfied with a fairly methodical progression of content, which is probably paying off because everything that I see them do has been very high quality and obviously a logical expansion of what the game's already been doing. So yeah, Deep Rock's awesome. If you haven't tried it and you're up for a casual first-person shooter dwarf mining rig laser mining experience, I highly recommend it. Doom and Doom Eternal. Doom was undeniably a culturally important game. Doom Eternal was an attempt by the studio to take its gameplay up a notch, and I think it succeeded in doing that. Although I think along the way it might have lost some of the soul of Doom that people who are not people who like the feel of Doom but not necessarily the mechanics of Doom, who aren't interested in mastering video games, might have gotten out of Doom 2016. I myself started a Nightmare playthrough that I abandoned because my ego couldn't tolerate playing anything below Nightmare because I had friends who'd finished it there. But admittedly, I just didn't have the patience. I may come back in some bored future moment and redo the game at a lower difficulty. That's what I did with Doom 2016, is I ended up finishing it on, I think, Ultraviolence. And I found what I liked most about the game was actually the setting. I thought the lore was kind of cool. The feeling, of course, is totally unique. But whether you can dash in the game or double jump, like, it doesn't. I'm not sure how much it matters to me. And I kind of relate to all the casual people who felt a little alienated by Doom Eternal. and all the platforming and all the obsession with the gameplay systems, and perhaps not enough emphasis on the setting and the mood. Diabotical. Diabotical is the only relevant. Well, no, it's not the only relevant. It is an arena first-person shooter, and it's well made. And it's been produced by a company owned and by former esports commentator James Harding. Too good. And it's a great game. And I played a bunch of it. I did a few content drops about it. But it's a game with an uncertain future. All the money that the studio was putting into tournaments was just pulled back, actually in recent days, start of 2021. And it was announced that rather than putting money into esports tournaments, which effectively kills the competitive scene for the game, that they would be using those same funds to redevote to 2 new games the studio will be putting out, ostensibly using the same engine they developed for Diabotical, which I think is a pretty big feels bad, man, for any arena shooter player who put time and money into Diabotical. I know to me it feels like a bit of a betrayal, although my investment was not significant. I'm probably going to have Davis back on, I imagine, in the near future when there's more to discuss to kind of review all of that. He spent a lot of time last year making a go at the esports scene for Diabotical and had some success. And I think he's decided to pull out from putting time into it now that this change has happened. So I might be absorbing some of that attitude, but it's a great game with a dubious future, as so many are. I have Skyrim on my list. I'm not sure how much I want to say about Skyrim, but it's an amazing game that I love. It is totally unique, and I love the world of Tamriel. I tried an experiment where I started a new playthrough. That was going to be all about reading books, but I think that was probably, I was trying to do too many things at once. I actually have a vision of potentially revisiting this in the future. If I ever put time into actually getting a Skyrim playthrough to the end game, where I've done most of the main story content, and maybe just have a few side quests left, I think that'd be a great time to maybe start streaming the game again. From the point of view of a character who's past his prime and who has had all the experiences the game has to share, and is now devoting his time to learning about the world and reading the books and spending time in his homestead, with tea and a good story, and maybe takes an occasional adventure out with rusty armor to as needed. I don't know. It's an idea that's still forming in the back of my head, but I think I've shelved the idea of playing this for a little while. I wax eloquently, or what I hope is eloquently, on the qualities of Skyrim in the very first podcast we did, the decade's best and worst, in episode number 1. So track that down if you're interested. Outer Wilds is on the list. This is an incredible game that I need to devote a weekend to, probably. Might be a good game to do a stream for. Not sure. I did stream it a bit last year, and it's a remarkable, unique game. And I went too long between sessions of playing it, and I forgot everything, which made it difficult to reconnect with it. It's a game with a cool story to tell in a clockwork universe, and I don't want to give it short shrift. So it'll be coming off the shelf, I hope, sometime in 2021. But it's a game that'll wait for me, too. It might be a few years, and that would be okay. I think it's the kind of game that if you've got a cabin in the woods with a gaming system and no internet, that you might want to take with you. Destiny Beyond Light. I'm going to have a hard time keeping my comments short on this game, but I'm going to force myself to. As with World of Warcraft, what got me reinterested in Destiny was seeing that the developer was going to be changing shit. And Bungie has slashed Destiny to ribbons with this expansion. They've sunset more than half of the weapons in the game, made them completely unusable for high-end content, which is all the content that you play once you've gone through the story. And they've introduced a new system where essentially any gear you get will be useless within a year. And so now the guns and the armor you play with is all stuff that's you've all gotten in recent history, which sounds okay. Like, it sounds like World of Warcraft, right? Where you're always grinding out new gear, you're always replacing gear and upgrading it. But there's no transmog system in Destiny. And in Destiny, the guns are different than getting like a weapon in like a World of Warcraft type game. The guns all feel different. And if you put in the time to grind out a role, that it works great for you. So you can have a weapon, let's say a shotgun, like a first in, last out, that has hundreds of different combinations of perks, but you get that one perk combination, and you work and you work and you get 50, 100, 150, 200 versions of that weapon. And the 201st drops, and it has exactly the perk combination that you love. And you pour your love into that weapon and you use it. And it's part of your loadouts. And then one day, because it took you 6 months to grind out 200 rolls, 6 months later after you just got it, it's done. You can't use it in current content anymore. It feels like a real violation of the basic covenant that players have with the game of Destiny. And I think it's very alienating for people who don't play the game every day to know that anything that you get has no permanence. The connections you make to the guns are more important than a piece of gear in World of Warcraft that you just replace when you get more stats. Because in Destiny, it's not about having more stats, it's about having the right combination of things. It's about personalization, which makes it about identity. And they just make you throw that out every year. They also got rid of 2/3 of the content in the game at the start of the expansion. They have not brought in anywhere near enough to replace it. There's old content in the game that gives rewards that cannot be played in current content. It's fucking wrong, is what it is. And Bungie has some big balls to drag Destiny players through the mud like this. The promise that they've made is that it'll make it better. It'll make it possible for them to make a better overall weapon sandbox balance for the game that's more enjoyable, easier to support, and more able to be more successfully supported by Bungie. So far, I don't think they've shown that. And in fact, they've introduced a new power in the game that makes a complete joke out of PvP, the stasis power, which I admit is super fun and probably one of the best features of Beyond Light. And Beyond Light is also another interesting thing. It's the first content introduced to Destiny 2 that was originally planned for Destiny 3. Bungie went to people in the community and said, do you want Destiny 3? Or do you want us to keep improving Destiny 2? And everyone said keep improving Destiny 2. No one wants a relaunch. But I feel like Bungie forced a relaunch down the throats of their fans by getting rid of old content, for taking weapons out of people's hands, and bringing far less back in than they took out. And it looks like this is just going to continue to happen. There's a new wave of stories going around right now about how people are realizing that there's a new threshold they're getting to where a new set of weapons and armor are going to be sunset. People are doing the math to say, You sunset 30 weapons and you only bring in 12 more. Why is the game shrinking? And I think it's a question that needs to be answered. And although we know that they are planning yearly expansions for the next couple of years, I think it's the basic formula that needs to be looked at. The basics of Destiny has always been its strength: the shooting and the powers. But in my opinion, the larger gameplay loops that include combat have always been the weakness. And I think it's never been weaker than it is now, probably. At least not since I played during Forsaken. All right, I failed to be brief, as promised. The only other game on my list is Cyberpunk, which everyone wants to talk about. I will say that I put in my 5 hours or so in Cyberpunk. I got through the intro sequence and I got to the introduction of Johnny Silverhand. And I have some thoughts about the game, but I think that they're not competent enough because I haven't played enough. But I've also decided that I'm going to let myself play a more complete version of the game. Once it's been patched up and once CDPR has maybe put in some DLC, which I think they'll probably do. And once the game gets some of the love it really needed and some of the extra development time that was sorely, sorely needed, there's a real story behind why CDPR pushed this game out the door in an unready state. And it's slowly unfolding, and we'll talk more about it. But it's a beautiful game with tragic flaws and deserved a better shake. I will say one of the things that surprised me is, number one, just how much like The Witcher 3 it is. And then upon having that reflection, I surprised myself because I realized that meant that I bought into the hype.